Check out this graph. It demonstrates the consistent increase in food prices in the US over the previous 5 years. Supply-related variables have been the main drivers of the price hikes. Like a perfect storm, it has been. The primary factor is most likely climate change. The unfavorable weather that affects major output is that in Argentina, Brazil, California, or areas of heavy rain in Europe and China. Mother Nature is therefore not on the side of food production. We have a serious transportation issue. The cost of labor is rising generally. Particularly when it comes to food poverty, the issue is truly wicked, complex, and diverse. Differences in access to food have always occurred. As a result, 35 million American households were struggling to put food on the table even before COVID. So, it's not brand new. Hello my friends, welcome to my Energy Economist channel. We will provide an explanation of why food prices are increasing continuously in this video. Stay with me, then. The Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, previously known as food stamps, saw a rise in funding during the Biden administration in August 2021. The benefits will now increase by more than 25%, bringing the average monthly benefit for each beneficiary from $121 to $157. We have a significant issue in this country, whether it be food deserts or malnutrition. Why then is food becoming more expensive in the US? What does that mean for Americans, and what can buyers do? We may further split out the average annual increase in food prices seen in that chart. 1 pound of 100% ground beef cost, on average, $3.55 in February 2017. Prior to the implementation of significant social distancing measures in February 2020, 3 years later, it cost $4.03. Grocery prices peaked at $5.33 in June 2020, but after the pandemic limitations were relaxed, they at least briefly stabilized. In January 2021, they started to slowly rise again, but they haven't been rising as quickly as they were at the height of the pandemic. Through 2022, food prices remained on the rise. The cost of goods won't go down. However, the rate of increase in food costs will return to normal. The level of price rises will not be too substantial. Food costs are rising in general, not simply in absolute terms. Companies are coming up with innovative ways to pass on rising prices to customers. The process of shrinkflation exists. Manufacturers do this by putting less product in a box while maintaining the same price. The pattern began in the late 1980s, according to 2 Harvard Business School experts. When they discovered that chock full of nuts dropped their 1988 serving size of coffee from 1 pound 10 to 134 ounces. It has decreased to 11.5 ounces by 2004. Manufacturers do not want to scare away potential clients. Therefore, they have 3 options as prices rise. One option is to absorb the cost and essentially close shop. That model is not particularly resilient. The second step is to transfer the higher costs. Alternately, you might decrease the volume of product in the package, which is option number 3. It is a good business practice to reduce the size of the product while keeping the pricing the same. Because it's less evident, consumers don't respond to sticker price hikes the same way they do to product reduction. Customers do not calculate how much they are spending per ounce or per pound. Therefore, a slight reduction in packing size won't have a significant impact. Everything is impacted by climate change. It has an impact on our crops. Our livestock are affected. Over time, it can bring about natural occurrences like floods and droughts. All of these are issues that, if we don't address them quickly, could lead to a food supply deficit. In August 2021, the UN Secretary General referred to a study by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change as a code red for humanity. The report emphasizes numerous times how the threat of climate change to food security worldwide. Consider the current situation with coffee, for instance. Brazil is unable to produce as much coffee as we would want due to the rain. Therefore, a 30% price increase in coffee is anticipated. In California, there are wildfires that are seriously burning numerous farms and ranches. As it comes to climate change and what is happening, we have serious issues. We discuss this tipping point as though it will occur in the far future. But in actuality, our activities today have an impact on tomorrow. The epidemic disrupts worldwide supply chains in a variety of industries, including computer chips, lumber, and shipping containers. The supply chain for food production was similar. Food supply networks are influenced by a wide range of variables. Starting the process are the agricultural farmers who raise crops like corn, wheat, and soybeans. Additionally, dairy farmers and ranchers that raise animals exist. The cost of transporting them is added to the cost of feeding them and keeping them hydrated. How can I have maize transported from Iowa to New York City? To really sell something, it must travel from their silos to a vehicle that is delivered to a customer. That implies that the cost of cattle that eat maize increases as the price of food in a certain category, like corn, goes up. Fuel price increases result in higher transportation expenses, which raise the price of food as a whole. Before the epidemic, there were transportation problems that were raising the price of food. We have a workforce of elderly truck drivers who are retiring and earning less money than they used to. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration imposed harsher regulations on commercial truck drivers in the summer of 2019. The new regulations limited the amount of time they could drive between breaks. They thus earn less money because they are compensated by the journey rather than the hour. Therefore, what happens if they are unable to drive for 20 hours straight and must stop after 8 or 9 hours? They generate less income. These pre-existing problems were made worse by the pandemic. Quite simply, a lot of the imported and exported goods that are transported by ship and arrive in containers were destroyed during the pandemic. Wherever those ships were, those containers were locked down, and in some cases, they are still locked down. As a result, there are containers with food that is sometimes rotting inside in all the wrong places in the world. Beginning in August 2021, the cost of transporting a 40-foot container from China to the east coast of the United States reached all-time highs, costing more than $20,000. The cost of that identical treatment will be roughly $2,500 in early March 2020. More than merely transportation problems were brought on by the pandemic. As COVID continued to spread early in the pandemic, meat packing plants and other food industries found it difficult to maintain operations. Former President Donald Trump used the Defense Production Act at the end of April 2020 to designate meatpacking plants as vital infrastructure and keep them operating. This was intended as a means of reducing the strain that the coronavirus was putting on the food supply chain. During the initial wave of the epidemic, 238 United Food and Commercial Employees frontline employees perished from COVID, according to a report published by the United Food and Commercial Workers International Union in late June 2020. The Centers for Disease Control discovered in July 2020 that COVID-19 had been detected in 9% of workers at meat and poultry processing facilities in 14 states. The issue is that these plants, whether they produce frozen food or chicken, were designed for efficiency. They were not designed for social isolation. Building better, more effective manufacturing is necessary. The proposal to construct a huge meat processing plant and supply the entire nation from it. That is out of date. As a result of the pandemic, food prices increased significantly due to rising labor costs and a continuing labor shortage. Simply put, labor is getting more expensive. In order to attract labor, shops, grocery stores, restaurants, and producers have had to raise pay during the previous few months. It combines each of these elements. I believe it is really challenging to answer the question, what did the pandemic do? What affects the climate? Why is transportation necessary? Therefore, we have to group everything together and address it as a whole. One of the things that is obvious to us when we consider the rising cost of food is that families cannot afford it. That will make it harder if you already have a very limited budget and are having trouble. And it forces some people into food insecurity who were before holding it together and could essentially consider themselves to be food secure. When Americans don't have enough food, the U.S. government uses the terms food insecurity and food insufficiency to characterize the situation. Simply put, food insecurity is a severer kind of food deficiency. A household is deemed to be food insecure by the United States Department of Agriculture if at least one member of the home occasionally struggled to find enough food because there wasn't enough money or other resources available. A household may be classified as food insecure based on its low food intake, but it may also examine the quality of its diet. Food insecurity is measured on a sliding scale. A yearly survey is used by the U.S. government to gauge the level of food insecurity. In 2020, 13.8 million American households were deemed to be food insecure, according to the United States Department of Agriculture's most recent assessment on this topic. The Census Household Pulse Survey, used by the government to measure food insufficiency more frequently than food insecurity. In April 2020, the U.S. government began gathering this information. Thus, throughout the majority of the pandemic, information about the prevalence of food shortage is available in real time. Respondents are asked to describe their recent 7-day availability to food in the poll. They are categorized as food deficient if they said that they occasionally or regularly did not have enough to eat. 9.8% of all U.S. families had insufficient food as of the end of April 2020. In December 2020, it reached its highest point of 13.7%. When compared to August 2021, it is now 7.8%. But not every home is impacted in the same way. Black, Latino, and multiracial households have not had the same improvements as white, Asian, or homes as a whole. Because food costs in the U.S. are low relative to other nations as a percentage of total household expenses, little research has been done on the relationship between high food prices and rising food insecurity in the U.S. A 2013 study is among the most recent ones on the subject. It was shown that for households at 200% or less of the federal poverty level, local food costs have a significant impact on food insecurity. To put that into perspective, this would be a family of 4 making little more than $47,100 a year in one of the 48 contiguous states. Well, if our body doesn't obtain the nutrition it needs to function as effectively as possible, it will eventually adorn. Food insecurity is particularly tough for moms, who frequently prioritize feeding their children first as a coping method. They will therefore be without. People experience mental health issues since being without food is distressing. And if you can't feed your children, it's much more depressing. We're being told that this is just one of several difficulties that families have had to deal with recently. And it has significantly increased their stress levels, so I believe we will need to look very carefully about how we address food insecurity in a holistic manner that acknowledges it as one of many social risks influencing health outcomes for families. There are ways for government officials and businesses to assist those impacted by increased food prices. Helping Americans with lesser incomes purchase food as prices rise is one strategy the government has used. Experts generally agree that government food programs are the main line of defense in terms of public policy against food poverty. The biggest nationally funded program is SNAP. The program, formerly known as food stamps, gives money to families who are struggling to feed themselves with the aim of providing access to sufficient quantities of nutritious food. These initiatives assist families in reducing the rising prices so they can afford to prepare a dinner that includes some fruits and vegetables, allowing them to afford to eat all the meals they should eat and provide their children with all the meals they should receive. The United States Department of Agriculture was mandated by the 2018 Farm Bill to review the so-called Thrifty Food Plan by 2022. The maximum SNAP benefits permitted are determined using this approach. The method used to determine SNAP benefits was clearly flawed. There wasn't enough money for them to buy the food they required to maintain a diet in accordance with the dietary recommendations. Since the plan's creation in the late 1970s, this was the first time they had ever been reviewed. So, it's crucial in our opinion that individuals continue to have access to SNAP and that it is sufficient given we work on the federal food program. There are techniques that could be able to decrease the price of food as a whole rather than aiding people in getting access to it as prices rise. We need to alter our corporate practices to combat climate change. The first stage is to create new technologies that can make farming more efficient, whether it's indoor farming or outdoor farming. In addition to addressing other supply chain problems including staffing shortages and growing labor costs, new technology can also help. It's important to better organize the food supply chain. More data sharing between companies is required in the supply chain. To properly understand the factors influencing demand and pricing, we need more information. By using techniques like AI and machine learning, they will significantly contribute to the creation of more precise predicted results. When using tools like artificial intelligence, you combine it with our human brainpower to immediately identify the issues. Which situations would be the worst? How do we come up with approaches to address such issues and find solutions? Customers have a few alternatives when it comes to making financial savings at the business. We must become better consumers. We must consider the cost per unit. We must consider the shop brands. The majority of store brands now are comparable to or superior to many of the national names available, and they are also less expensive. Fresh produce is emphasized as being optimal and very nourishing. However, there are less expensive options available, and I like to constantly remind folks that using frozen food is perfectly acceptable. Despite rising food prices, there is little doubt that we can save money. But we need to approach it more intelligently. Please take a second to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and do not forget to also hit the notification bell. Thank you for watching and goodbye.